Identifying technical issues on location pages at scale without going crazy. First, a little bit about me. My name is Rachel Anderson, and I'm a technical SEO at DeepCrawl, where I work with enterprise clients. But my first love in SEO was local SEO, so I love the intersection of enterprise with local. So think e-commerce brands with physical locations. I'm also, in my personal life, really into gardening and fermentation. This is a picture of my garden from earlier this year. And I have a Sphinx cat named Mulberry who is super sweet and also loves to interrupt presentations. So, identifying technical issues on location pages at scale without going crazy. We know that location pages are really important for local businesses, and many enterprise businesses have truly terrible location pages, but analyzing those location pages at scale can be really difficult. So how do we identify technical issues on location pages at scale without going crazy in the process? Well, I break it into steps. Step 1 is a technical audit that I use to identify technical issues on location pages. I'm going to outline some common technical issues that I see on enterprise location pages in this presentation. Then step 2 is identifying which location pages need some extra love. So I want to maximize the value of my additional time and resources by focusing on pages that need that extra push. And for this, I'm going to use Census Bureau data, and I'm really excited to share how I did this. And then finally, I want to monitor ongoing performance to make sure that my technical fixes are actually fixing things and that my marketing dollars are actually working. And we do have something working in our favor here, which is that location pages are generally templated. So if you find an issue on one page or a few pages, it's probably an issue across all your pages. So with that, we'll step into step 1, technical audit. And we'll begin by running a full site crawl. So I use DeepCrawl because I work at DeepCrawl and I have unlimited credits, but Screaming Frog, Sitebulb, and Botify are all great options too. So I try to include things like schema, core web vitals, and backlinks, and I am running a full site crawl even though we're focusing on location pages because I want information about internal linking structures. So the city-state extraction we'll talk a little bit about. You may or may not need this. If you have your city and state name for each location in your title or header or meta description, something that's already being pulled by your crawler, you don't need to worry about this. But in many cases, they aren't in any of those elements. So you need to set up a regex extraction to pull your city and state data. Once you have your crawl, we're going to perform a technical audit of the location pages. Now, I'm just highlighting common issues that I see, but there are probably plenty more on your website, so make sure you take the time to do a full technical audit. The first thing I see a lot is that location pages don't exist, and by this I mean there's no individual static URLs for locations. Instead, sometimes what you'll have is this mega location page that has all of the information for all your locations. In addition to being completely overwhelming for users, this is not a really great bot experience either. So you want to make sure that you have individual static URLs for each location page. Gap UK is a good example of what not to do. All of their information is on one page, and it is not very helpful. Another thing we see a lot is that location pages exist, but they aren't discoverable. So you need to make sure that your location pages are listed in your sitemap. Also, a lot of times, location pages are hidden behind a user input field. Bots are not inputting a city, state, or a zip code when they crawl your website, so they're not going to be able to see those URLs. So you need to make sure that you have internal links in another way. Which leads me to the next issue I see a lot is that there aren't any internal links to location pages. In this example, there's 4,500 different locations, and only 27 of them have internal links. Your location pages are extremely valuable to your business, so make sure that you're linking to them. Another thing I see frequently is duplicate versions of location pages, and by this I mean trailing slash versus no trailing slash, www versus non-dub, title case versus lowercase, and indexable parameters. Many of these things can be fixed by a simple canonical tag. Another thing we see is that there are canonical tags in place. However, the internal links are to the non-canonical URL. In this example, there are internal links to the title case URL, but the canonical URL is actually the lowercase URL. So make sure that you're linking to the proper version of your location page URL. Another way that this gets messed up is with GMB profiles. So if you think back to Gap UK, they're all linking to 404 pages, which is really not a great user experience or a great bot experience. So don't do that. Another thing that I'll see is links to the main location page. That's not good. Or to the home page. Nope, don't do that. Go ahead and make sure each of your GMB profiles is linked to the most relevant location page. Also, all of your location pages should have local business markup or the more appropriate subtype of local business markup. Other types of schema that you may want to consider are review or breadcrumb. There's plenty of different schemas out there that may be appropriate for your location pages, so make sure you check that out. Martha Van Berkel has a presentation that you should check out because she is a queen at schema, so make sure you check that out if you are wondering about what kinds of schema that you should be including on your location pages. And then finally, missing or poor titles, meta descriptions, and headers is something I see really frequently. So this is a wonderful opportunity to be putting in keywords about your locations. So Home Depot does this really well. So they have the brand name, location name, relevant keywords, the city, state, and even the zip code in their title tag. A missed opportunity that I see a lot is that brands will put their brand name as their H1 instead of the individual location name. So Madewell does this well. They have an H1 of Tyson's Corner, which is the location of this particular store. All right, so what have we discovered in step 1? We've discovered common technical issues with our location pages. So what's next? I've only scratched the surface of technical issues that you may see with location pages, so make sure you're checking for additional technical issues that are more specific to your website. I also did not really cover common content issues that we see. So make sure that you're checking out common content issues with location pages as well. Amanda Jordan did a presentation at Local Search Summit that I think is really beneficial if you're looking for a starting point for common content related issues with location pages. But some things to consider are missing address, phone number descriptions, reviews, or links out to other pages. All right, so step 1's complete. We've run a crawl. We found technical issues on our location pages, and then hopefully we are implementing fixes. So we will celebrate with this cool cat gif. And move on to step 2, which is identifying which location pages need some extra love. And because these pages need extra love, I've labeled them as extra sad. If you go into Google Search Console and sort your location pages by highest clicks to lowest clicks, what you're likely going to find is that your highest clicked locations are also the highest population locations. So you can see in this example, New York, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles are all the top clicked locations. Now this is more indicative of population than performance. So what I wanted to do is find a way to see which centers or locations are actually performing the best and the worst. So to do this, I used census data and some math. So let's talk about that. First, I needed to collect the data. Now, the US Census Bureau and Canada and the UK and many other countries, they have this population census data that you can download straight from the internet. So I did this for the US. Also, you need some Google Search Console data. So you need clicks and impressions data for a period of time. So I have used 6 months here. However, depending on the seasonality of your business, you may need more or less. I downloaded this using the API, but you can use Supermetrics. And then if you don't have a lot of locations, you may be able to get an export straight from Google Search Console. And then finally, we're going to need that crawl data export for our location pages from the crawl that we used in step 1. We want to make sure that that city-state extraction is part of it. So those are our 3 data sources, and now we can get down to business and do some math. Don't worry, I'm going to walk you through each step. We'll begin by creating a new Excel or Google sheet and pulling in our Google Search Console data. We need to have our URL, our clicks, and impressions for each of those URLs. Next, we're going to create a new tab and add in our crawl data. The only bits of crawl data that we need are our location URLs and that city and state extraction. Now, a lot of times your state is going to be the state code instead of the full state name. So what I did is I created an additional sheet and used a VLOOKUP to convert MD to Maryland and TX to Texas. What we want to end up with is what is in column G, which is the city and state side by side with no space or comma. So whatever you need to do to manipulate it so that you have your URL and then that city and state side by side at the end of this step. Now we're going to go back over to our Google Search Console tab and use a VLOOKUP to pull in that city state for each of our URLs. All right, so this is the most complicated part of this whole presentation, and it's really not that bad. I created a distribution model based on population of cities. So large cities like New York with over 1 million residents were assigned a bucket of 9. Tiny cities with under 5,000 residents were assigned a bucket value of 1. And then I created a multiplier value for each bucket. The goal here is to kind of make the clicks not as dependent on population. So you can see here that the multiplier value for 9 bucketed cities is 0.8. So each click is only worth 0.8 of a click, whereas 1 bucketed cities are assigned a click value of 1.5. And we'll see how this plays out here in a minute. Okay, that was complicated, so we're going to celebrate with this cat gif. All right, back into the presentation. So we're going to create a new tab in our sheet and pull our census data into that tab. So the census data that we need is the city state and then our bucket and multiplier. You can hard code these bucket and multiplier values in here if you want. I used a separate sheet for the multiplier values because I adjusted them a little bit after the fact, but doing them hard coded is perfectly fine. All right, once you have your census data in here, you're gonna go back over to our Google Search Console tab, and we're gonna pull in our bucket and multiplier values for each city-state combination using another VLOOKUP. So but at the end of the step, we're gonna have our page, our clicks, our impressions, our city-state, our bucket, and our multiplier value for each one of our location URLs. And we're feeling good about ourselves. And then we start scrolling down, and then we might have a minor freak out because some data may be missing. And it probably is missing, because if you think about it, not all of your location pages are probably going to line up with census data exactly. So you can see some examples here. Bronx, New York and Brooklyn, New York, according to US Census data, are part of New York, New York. Same thing with North Hollywood, California and Los Angeles, California. So what you're gonna need to do is some manual changes here to make sure that your data matches census data. If you're gonna go crazy at any point in this process, this is that point. And at some point, you're probably just going to need to stop. We're looking for trends, not perfection here. Trends, not perfection. Once you get to the data to a point that you're comfortable, we can do the final math step, which is simply multiplying our clicks and impressions by our multiplier value. So you can see here, Houston, Texas had 991 clicks, and it has a multiplier value of 0.8. So we multiply 991 by 0.8 to get 792.8 clicks. I do the same thing for impressions and just copy and paste that formula down. All right, now we actually have our highest and lowest performing centers based on adjusted clicks and impressions. But I wanna make sure that I feel comfortable with these multiplier values because it's not going to be the same for every data set. Think about your different locations for businesses. You're not going to have the same locations in every city as every other business. So your multiplier value may need to be adjusted a little bit. To do this, what I did is I sorted my different locations by adjusted clicks highest to lowest, and then I looked at that bucket column to make sure that there were no clumps of numbers. So what I'm looking for here is I want to make sure that not all of my 1 bucketed cities are at the very top. If that's the case, I probably need to pull back on that multiplier value a little bit. Same thing if all of the 9 bucketed cities are at the very bottom, that probably means I need to boost that multiplier value a little bit. Another thing that I did was pull it into Google Data Studio and use some color coding to identify if buckets needed adjustments. Now that may or may not be useful for you. My multiplier values are a great starting point, and I just did a little bit of adjusting to dial it in. But you can do some other really cool things in Google Data Studio. I use it to identify regional trends. So I divided the data into regions, and then I used bucket and state filters to identify particular regions of the US that this client was not performing as well in. So you can see the Northeast, the DFW, Metroplex, and then California pretty much as a whole were underperforming. So I was able to identify this just by pulling it into Google Data Studio and visualizing it in a way that I couldn't really see in Google Sheets. The final thing that I did with adjusted clicks and impressions is pull it back into my original export from my crawl. And then I sorted it by clicks, highest to lowest. And then I took the top 10% and the bottom 10%. And then I compared metrics across them to look for additional issues. So what I did is I color coded them green and red, and then I just looked through each column to see what the differences were. You may or may not find anything of value here. One time I found that the highest clicked locations also had backlinks. That makes sense, right? But another time I found that canonicalized pages were actually performing better than the canonical version, which is not what you would expect. So this only takes 10 or 15 extra minutes depending on your, data size. So I think it's worth it to look for additional technical issues. And that's it. So what have we discovered? We've discovered our worst performing locations by adjusted clicks, our worst performing regions by adjusted clicks, and possibly even some new technical issues along the way. So this whole section took me about 20 hours to do, which I realize is a long time, but I had to manipulate some census data a little bit to get this working. So if you download census data, a lot of times states have weird words after the city name. So it'll say like Richmond Township instead of just Richmond. So I had to do some data cleanup there. If you want me to share with you my cleaned up version of the census data, I'm happy to do that. Just send me a DM on Twitter. Also, I had to kind of work out this whole process. If you follow my process, I think you can knock it out in an afternoon. Okay, so what's next? We've discovered which locations are performing the worst. So what do we do about it? Well, I'd encourage you to look at the competitors in the regions and locations where you're underperforming and see what they're doing to outperform you. Think about what additional SEO efforts you can put towards those specific regions and locations. And again, I would encourage you to look at competitors to determine what that is. It may be content, it may be links, it may just be adding canonical tags to pages. So look at what competitors are doing in those regions that you're underperforming and put plans in place to fix it. And in the meantime, think about what non-SEO marketing resources you can apply to those locations or regions. Could you throw some extra ad spend their way? So step 2 is complete, and we will celebrate with a pizza cat gif. We have identified which locations and regions are struggling the most. We've possibly identified other technical issues, and we have developed a strategy to improve performance for those locations. Which brings us to the final step, which is monitoring ongoing performance. So to begin here, I schedule recurring crawls. So if you don't have data going on into the future about your technical performance, how will you know if things are changing? So weekly, fortnightly, or monthly crawls of your website will allow you to monitor for new technical issues. I also really like to use segmentation for this. So DeepCrawl and a few other crawlers allow you to set up segments on URLs. So what I do is I set up a segment for my location pages, for my product pages, for my category pages, for my blog pages, and this allows me to see what specific technical issues apply to each subset of pages, so I can keep a close eye on those location pages. You also need to set up some time each month to actually review these. If you're setting up these crawls but not looking at them, that's not doing you any good. So make sure you set up time each month to review your crawls for technical issues. You can also set up performance monitoring on those adjusted clicks and impressions in Google Data Studio. So what I do is actually use the Google Search Console API to pull data into BigQuery and then use the BigQuery connector for Google Data Studio. I do that because I'm working with more than 10,000 locations at a time, so I'd fill up a Google Sheet in about 2 months. But if you have fewer locations, you can use the Supermetrics connector or manual exports from Google Search Console and put them in Google Sheets. Remember this gotcha from earlier? If you're going to set up ongoing performance monitoring, I'd really encourage you to take the time to fill out as many of these city states as possible because you're going to want that data to be accurate moving forward. Okay, so we're going to set up 2 data sources for Google Data Studio. One is going to be a Google Sheet that's going to have your location pages, the city, state, the bucket, and the multiplier. This is real similar to step 2. And then the other data source is going to be our Google Search Console data. So whether this is a Google Sheet like I have listed here, or it's in BigQuery. Once you have those data sources, you can blend them in Google Data Studio to create a blended data source that allows you to do really cool visualizations and show the change over time for buckets, for cities, for regions, and I think it's really helpful. You can also pull in technical monitoring alongside it. So DeepCrawl allows you to pull in your technical issues. So if you think back to the segmentation that I talked about earlier, you can pull in your segment of location pages alongside the traffic for your location pages and monitor everything in one place, which I think is fantastic. You're not having to log into all these different platforms. So what have we discovered in step 3? We discovered techniques to monitor ongoing technical performance, and how to pull ongoing adjusted traffic performance data into Google Data Studio. So we will celebrate with the keyboard cat GIF. All right, so I would encourage you not to stop there. This is just barely scratching the surface of what you can do with census data. Think about additional use cases for it. Can you use it with Google Analytics geodata? Can you use it with keyword tracking? The census data also has metropolitan area data, so maybe you could set up metro information instead. I think there are so many different use cases for this, especially with the Google Maps integration for Google Data Studio these days. If you're using census data in a really cool way, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it or work alongside you on it. All right, so we have completed a technical audit. We have identified which location pages needed extra love using census data. And we have set up ongoing performance monitoring to make sure that everything looks good going into the future, all without going crazy. So we will celebrate with this DJ cat GIF, which I just love. Thank you.